It was Mother's Day, May 10th, 2020, in Benton County, Missouri. The morning sun filtered through the trees of a quiet, wooded neighborhood in Edwards, a small, rural community hugging the edges of the Ozark countryside. For most, it was a day filled with family gatherings, flower deliveries, and phone calls full of affection. But for Kelsey Smith, it was a day that would slowly transform into a living nightmare. Her mother, 48-year-old Echo Michelle Lloyd, didn't answer her texts. She didn't pick up the phone. And after hours of silence, Kelsey's concern gave way to dread. Echo had been looking forward to Mother's Day. Just a day earlier, she'd spoken to Kelsey and made plans to celebrate together. She had sounded upbeat, excited even. But now, the absence of a reply seemed entirely out of character. Echo was not the type to disappear, especially not on a day that meant so much to her. Kelsey drove out to her mother's property the following morning, May 11th. Echo's home was tucked away in a secluded, tree-lined area near the lake of the Ozarks, accessible only by winding gravel roads. Her car was still in the driveway. The door was locked, the curtains drawn. The silence of the scene was deafening. She knocked. No answer. She peered through windows, called out, walked the perimeter. Still nothing. After several more tries, Kelsey managed to get inside the house. What she found chilled her to the core. Everything was there: Echo's purse, medications, keys. Even her car was parked exactly where she always left it. But Echo was gone. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Inside, things seemed odd. There wasn't any obvious sign of a struggle, but there was something about the atmosphere, a strange energy, as Kelsey later described it, that felt wrong. Items were misplaced. The house was unusually tidy for her mom, who typically had books, mail, and coffee cups scattered about. And one more thing caught her attention. Her mother's cell phone was missing. That phone would become the ghost that haunted the investigation. Kelsey reported her mother missing that same day. The Benton County Sheriff's Office dispatched deputies, and a missing person bulletin was issued. But from the beginning, the case unfolded slowly, some would say, frustratingly so. There was no immediate ground search, no command center, no doctors or dogs, and in those critical first 48 hours, whatever traces Echo may have left behind were already beginning to fade into the Missouri woods. Investigators treated it as a missing adult case, not a suspected abduction. After all, there were no overt signs of foul play, no forced entry, no screams heard, no blood. Echo had simply walked out, or had she been taken? But Kelsey knew her mother. Echo had battled through tough times, depression, physical pain, and years of fighting to stay sober, but she always kept going for her children. She wasn't the type to leave, not without a word, not without her essentials. Echo had even been planting flowers outside in the days before she disappeared. Her houseplants were watered, a fresh pot of coffee had been brewed, and her cigarettes and lighter were still in her purse. It made no sense. In the days that followed, Kelsey took matters into her own hands. She printed flyers, organized search parties, and posted pleas on social media. Strangers from neighboring towns joined the effort, combing the woods near Echo's property, searching abandoned sheds, underbrush, and culverts. Still no trace. Then came a revelation, subtle but disturbing. Kelsey gained access to Echo's phone records. The last known call, placed from her mother's phone, occurred just after 5:50 p.m. on Mother's Day, May 10th. The call was made to someone Echo knew well, someone with whom she had a strained and allegedly volatile relationship. That person was a neighbor. Locals began whispering about this man, a nearby resident, who had a history of controlling behavior. Echo, according to her daughter, had been trying to distance herself from him in the weeks before she vanished. Friends said he was possessive and uncomfortably involved in her life. Kelsey stated her mother had confided in her she was afraid of him. But despite the suspicions, no arrest was made. The neighbor was interviewed but not named publicly. No charges were filed. And according to the sheriff's office, there was no hard evidence linking him or anyone to Echo's disappearance. More time passed. The leads grew colder. Kelsey returned to her mother's property again and again, convinced that anything, had to have been overlooked. One day, while checking the area near a shed behind the house, she discovered something troubling. Trash had been moved. Boxes had been rearranged. A pair of Echo's shoes sat neatly near the entrance, as if someone had taken them off before going inside or placed them there intentionally. More than that, the lock on the shed looked different. Kelsey was adamant it hadn't been the same the last time she was there. She informed law enforcement, but they remained cautious. Without physical evidence, a body, a weapon, blood, they could not act decisively. The case continued to stagnate. Frustrated, Kelsey turned to independent investigators and true crime communities online. She started documenting every detail, from witness statements to inconsistencies in timelines. It was in these circles that the whispers became louder. Locals reported strange activity in days following Echo's disappearance. A neighbor allegedly saw a bonfire burning late into the night on May 10th, a large roaring flame at a property not far from Echo's. Another individual claimed to have seen a pickup truck driving up and down the gravel road repeatedly that weekend, unusual for such a remote area. Nothing solid ever materialized. As spring turned to summer, the weight of the unknown grew heavier. Echo's garden grew wild. Her mail piled up. The house stood like a time capsule, frozen on the day she vanished. And then came a new lead. A tipster claimed to have seen Echo weeks after her disappearance alive. She had been spotted at a grocery store in Versailles, Missouri, nearly 30 miles away. The woman reportedly looked disheveled, dazed. When approached, she said she didn't want to help and walked away. Authorities checked surveillance footage but couldn't confirm whether the woman was indeed Echo. It added another strange layer to an already confounding mystery. Could she have left on her own? Could someone have manipulated her, coerced her, hidden her? To understand where Echo Lloyd might have gone, one had to look deeper into her past, her relationships, her fears. Because beneath the calm exterior of that country home, secrets festered, and someone somewhere knows why she never came back. The quiet town of Edwards, Missouri didn't forget Echo Lloyd, but it didn't speak her name loudly either. In a place where everyone knows everyone and secrets often travel in whispers, Echo's disappearance became more like a shadow always present but never fully confronted. Kelsey, however, refused to let that shadow settle into silence. Each morning, she woke with the same gnawing thought. Someone knew something. Someone had to. A woman doesn't just vanish off the face of the earth, not like that. Not when everything she owned, everything she needed was still inside that house. As the weeks dragged on, Kelsey replayed every conversation she'd ever had with her mother, every warning, every uneasy sigh Echo had ever made when speaking about her neighbor. Echo had told her more than once that she wanted to move, that the situation was becoming too much. But she hadn't elaborated, and now she never would. But Kelsey remembered another detail, one that law enforcement hadn't prioritized. Her mother had once asked her to hold on to a set of documents, medical records, journals, and what appeared to be printouts of text messages. At the time, Kelsey hadn't thought much of it. Her mother had always been protective of her privacy, and she'd mentioned wanting to have her back covered, just in case. Now those papers took on a chilling importance. Buried in those folders were handwritten notes. Some were just scattered thoughts, pages of Echo's handwriting that rambled through her emotions, her daily battles with pain and anxiety, her frustrations with isolation. But a few pages stood out. They referenced someone who was watching her, someone who didn't want her talking to others. The same name came up over and over, her neighbor. It became increasingly clear that Echo had been documenting someone who made her feel unsafe. Kelsey took the notes to the Benton County Sheriff's Office, hoping they would take it as more than just paranoia. But again, without direct evidence of a crime, they could only log the documents into the file. The case remained officially missing under investigation. In the absence of answers, rumors began to flourish. Some believed Echo had been lured away and trafficked. Others thought she had suffered a mental health episode and wandered into the dense woods surrounding her home. But Kelsey rejected both ideas. Her mother had her medications, her routines, her cat, which she adored and would never leave behind. She had left the front door locked. She had planned her day. Echo had not walked away voluntarily. Local media picked up the story, but briefly. A segment aired on a regional news channel. The anchor mentioned Echo's name once, flashed a photo of her smiling in a red shirt, and urged anyone with information to call the sheriff's office. It wasn't enough. Kelsey began pushing harder. She contacted national outlets, online sleuthing communities, and even a few former FBI agents who specialized in cold cases. But getting traction was difficult. The pandemic had saturated the news cycle. Missing person cases that weren't dramatic or headline-worthy were being overlooked. Still, Kelsey pressed on. Months passed. The seasons shifted. The forest surrounding Echo's home turned golden with autumn leaves and then bare with winter frost. Each passing day eroded potential evidence, but Kelsey clung to one possibility, the cell phone. That phone was still missing, and somewhere it had to be. She went over the phone records again. The final outgoing call on May 10th was to her neighbor, but there were other pings. The phone had connected with a tower north of Warsaw, Missouri, late that evening, nearly 25 miles from Echo's house. If accurate, that meant the phone and possibly Echo had left the property hours after the time she was last heard from. But no one knew who had it, and it wasn't turned back on again. Digital forensics experts told Kelsey that phones could often be traced even after being turned off, depending on how and when they were powered down. But she couldn't afford such services. Law enforcement claimed they had exhausted the phone tracking options through Echo's service provider, which yielded no exact location. So Kelsey turned her attention elsewhere to the people around her mother. She began questioning friends, neighbors, acquaintances. Some cooperated, others were silent. But one woman, a part-time house cleaner who had worked nearby, offered a strange story. She said she'd passed by Echo's house just days after she was reported missing. She remembered seeing a man on the property, pacing near the shed. She couldn't make out his face, but he was moving things around, appearing nervous, distracted. It was never verified. The tip was passed along, but nothing came of it. Still, Kelsey couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been back to the house after Echo disappeared. Then, in early 2021, a disturbing pattern emerged. Kelsey learned that the same neighbor her mother had feared had allegedly been involved in controlling behavior with other women in the area. He was never charged with anything, but restraining orders, harassment complaints, and late-night disturbances followed in his wake. Several of Echo's old friends described his demeanor as possessive and manipulative. But again, no proof. Just warnings lost in the bureaucratic sea of rural law enforcement files. Feeling cornered, Kelsey did something radical. She began recording everything. Every phone call with officials, every meeting with community members, every search she conducted on her own. She mapped out the terrain herself. She built a timeline so detailed it could pass for an FBI case report. And she uploaded it all to a blog and YouTube channel dedicated to Echo's case. That's when traction began. People started sharing her videos. Viewers offered analysis, suggestions, even drone footage from the area surrounding Echo's home. One viewer offered access to software. Another ran background checks. Slowly, a picture began to form, blurry but terrifying. It was becoming clear that Echo had been watched, that her sense of fear wasn't paranoia, it was real. The narrative shifted, not because law enforcement made a breakthrough, but because Kelsey forced people to pay attention. She pushed so hard that in April 2021, Missouri State Highway Patrol finally listed Echo's case as endangered missing. There wasn't much, no new funding, no new team, but it was a signal that someone somewhere recognized that Echo didn't just leave. Still, without physical evidence, there was no movement. And then, nearly a year after Echo vanished, someone came forward with a strange confession. A man, unrelated to the original neighbor of suspicion, told a private investigator that he had heard from someone at a local bar a rumor that Echo had been taken care of. When pressed, he couldn't remember the source. Alcohol and gossip blurred the lines of memory. But the claim sparked a new round of interest. Kelsey took that tip seriously. She knew rumors often held grains of truth. She also knew the silence of the town was no accident. Echo's disappearance wasn't just a mystery. It was a message, and that message was to stay quiet. But Kelsey had made up her mind long ago she would not be silent. So she went back to the beginning, to the one piece of evidence no one had fully investigated, the shed. She returned to the property again, this time with a friend and a metal detector. She scanned the ground around the shed, lifting leaves, brushing away topsoil, looking for any metallic trace of her mother's phone. She even tried to gain permission for ground-penetrating radar, but that required warrants and legal hurdles she couldn't overcome. Still, she found something odd, a patch of soil that appeared freshly overturned, even after months of weather. She marked it, photographed it, reported it. No one came to investigate. No one dug. And so the case remained frozen. Echo's name eventually faded from headlines, replaced by the next tragedy, the next missing face. But her daughter never gave up. She still believes her mother is close, that her remains or her captor are hidden in plain sight, that someone in that quiet town knows exactly what happened, and they've just been waiting for the noise to die down. But Kelsey has other plans, because this mystery isn't over. It's just beginning to reveal its darkest secrets. By the time the second anniversary of Echo Lloyd's disappearance passed, her name had become more than a case number. It had become a symbol of systemic failure, a haunting reminder of how easily someone can be erased, and how unwilling the system can be to look beneath the surface. 2 years, and still no trace, no forensic discovery, no suspects named, no arrests, not even the confirmation that Echo was dead. Kelsey marked the date by planting flowers in her mother's neglected garden, yellow tulips, Echo's favorite. The house remained untouched, its walls heavy with silence. In that stillness, Kelsey could feel her mother, not as a ghost, but as a presence, someone whose story was still unfinished. She placed a fresh flyer on the front gate, even though she knew no one would see it out there. But the act mattered, a refusal to let the world forget. And yet, forgetting seemed to be exactly what the town wanted. There was a chill in the way neighbors responded when asked about Echo. Some deflected, others shifted uneasily. It was as if a collective curtain had fallen over the case, sealing it off with quiet complicity. But Kelsey knew what silence really meant. She'd grown up in this town. She understood the unspoken rules. Don't ask too many questions. Don't challenge the wrong people. Don't stir waters that run deep. And yet here she was doing exactly that. So she returned to her mother's case file, or at least the one she'd built herself. Stacks of notes, maps, transcripts of interviews, even drone images taken by a volunteer pilot who'd flown over the woods in early spring, capturing areas law enforcement had never searched. One detail gnawed at her: the garden shed. Ever since that first unsettling visit with the shoes neatly placed at the entrance, the disturbed lock, and the rearranged boxes, she couldn't let it go. She contacted an independent cadaver dog handler, someone with years of experience searching for human remains. They agreed to help, volunteering their services in exchange for travel expenses. When they arrived, the handler brought 2 dogs. Both were certified, both trained to alert to decomposition. What happened next made Kelsey's blood run cold. One of the dogs alerted strongly near the side of the shed. It pawed, circled, and whined. The second dog did the same. It wasn't proof. It wasn't admissible in court. But it was something. Something more than Kelsey had gotten from law enforcement in 2 years. She reported it immediately. She filed an official request for the area to be excavated. The response came weeks later: insufficient evidence to warrant further investigation. That was it. The ground was never dug. And the question remained, what exactly was buried there? By now, word had spread online. Echo's case was being picked up by true crime podcasts. Social media posts using #FindEchoLloyd were gaining traction. A Reddit thread about her case had over 10,000 followers. Still, no movement from authorities. But then, another voice emerged, someone from inside. A former deputy who had worked for the Benton County Sheriff's Office years earlier reached out anonymously to Kelsey. He didn't share his name, but he gave enough credentials to prove his identity. What he said added a whole new layer of suspicion. According to him, the sheriff's office had been understaffed, underfunded, and deeply politically entangled. Certain individuals in the area, including Echo's neighbor, had unofficial protection. People were warned not to push too hard. The former deputy didn't go so far as to accuse anyone outright, but his tone made it clear. Something had been buried, and not just in the soil. He advised Kelsey to go federal. "You won't get what you need from the county," he said. "You need to escalate." So she did. Kelsey filed an official request with the FBI through their Missing Persons Division. She compiled every document she had: timelines, photos, maps, witness tips, and the cadaver dog alerts, and submitted a 60-page dossier. The response? A polite acknowledgement, and nothing else. There was no guarantee the FBI would open a case. Without a body or credible proof of interstate involvement, Echo's disappearance remained a local matter. So Kelsey changed tactics. She contacted the media again, only this time she didn't ask. She demanded. She pitched Echo's case as a national affair. A woman disappears. All signs point to foul play, and no one searches the one place 2 cadaver dogs. Finally, one outlet bit. An investigative reporter with a regional NBC affiliate traveled to Benton County and produced a feature story. It aired on the evening news, showing Kelsey standing outside the shed, pointing to the exact spot where the dogs had signaled. It showed the stack of files she'd built. It highlighted the lack of law enforcement follow-through. The story went viral. Within 48 hours, tens of thousands had seen the report. Comments poured in. Pressure mounted. Suddenly, the sheriff's office was being asked questions they had long avoided. And still no search warrant. No dig. But Kelsey had succeeded in one thing. She had dragged Echo's case back into the light. And that light exposed new shadows. 2 days after the story aired, someone vandalized Echo's mailbox. The post was snapped in half, the box thrown into a ditch. Then someone left a dead rabbit on the porch. No note, no explanation, just a message. Kelsey filed a report. Deputies took photographs but didn't investigate further. She was undeterred. She hired a private investigator, a retired detective from Kansas City, to conduct an independent review of the case. He spent weeks going through Echo's digital footprint, analyzing cell tower data, visiting locations identified in the timeline. What he found reinforced Kelsey's worst fear. Echo's phone pinged in 3 distinct locations the night she disappeared. One was near her home. One was near the local convenience store, even though there was no record of her being seen there. And the last ping was 27 miles away, near a rural bridge over the Lake of the Ozarks. The last ping. No activity after that. The investigator suggested 2 possibilities. Either the phone was thrown into the lake, or it was destroyed shortly after that final signal. He also believed that Echo had not left her home willingly. There were too many signs of preparation, unfinished chores, schedules, the door being locked from the inside, and too many signs of erasure, a house wiped of her usual clutter, a phone vanished, and a shed where dogs reacted violently. But again, no body, no proof. Only questions. Kelsey didn't stop. She began attending city council meetings, standing up during the public comment period, and asking the same question each time. Why hasn't anyone dug up that shed? Each time she received blank stares. Eventually, a council member pulled her aside and said, off the record, "There are people in this town who don't want that can of worms opened." It was the closest thing to confirmation she had ever received. And yet, it was still only a whisper. Meanwhile, Echo's story continued spreading online. New details emerged minor, often unverifiable. A former coworker claimed Echo had feared being watched. A woman from a neighboring town claimed she had given Echo a ride in 2019, and that she seemed troubled and afraid to go home. None of it could be proven. All of it fed the storm. Kelsey didn't care about hearsay anymore. She wanted one thing, the truth. And she was ready to dig for it herself. Summer 2023 arrived in Missouri with oppressive heat and heavier silence. The forest surrounding Echo Lloyd's home had grown thick and overgrown, hiding the trails once walked by volunteers and cadaver dogs. The house stood abandoned, quiet, still, untouched, a chilling monument to an unanswered question. Where was Echo? It had been 3 years. 3 years of Kelsey screaming into the void, pushing back against apathy, bureaucracy, and something darker. Deliberate silence, the kind of silence that isn't born from forgetfulness, but from fear. She had exhausted all the traditional routes: media coverage, petitions, private investigators, state representatives. She had spent thousands of dollars, countless sleepless nights, and more tears than she could count. Her frustration had turned to desperation, and desperation had started to look a lot like resolve. If no one would dig, she would. Kelsey returned to the property one final time in August 2023. It had been months since her last visit. Weeds had consumed the garden. Ivy crept up the siding of the house. The wind blew the scent of soil, pine, and mildew into the air. It felt like walking into a place frozen in time, Echo's time. She brought with her a small group of trusted friends, quiet supporters, people who believed her. Among them was a volunteer with experience in ground scanning. Not formal radar, but agricultural-grade soil imaging equipment, the kind that could detect disturbances and density changes underground. They scanned the area around the shed. The results came back strange. There was a rectangular section beneath the shed, about 5 feet long, 2 feet wide, that showed clear signs of having been disturbed at a different time than the rest of the ground around it. Kelsey froze. Her breathing slowed. The hair on the back of her neck rose. It was the confirmation she didn't want and needed all at once. She looked at the others. They didn't speak. They all knew what it meant. She took photos of the scan, sent them to the sheriff's office, and called, left messages. No response. It was the same wall she'd hit for years, impenetrable, cold, and disinterested. So she dug. She didn't wait for permission anymore. With a shovel in hand, she began removing the top layer of earth, inch by inch, rock by rock, root by root. The others helped. It was slow, careful work. They weren't professionals. They didn't know what exactly they were looking for, only that something or someone might be buried beneath. After nearly 2 feet, they found it. A piece of fabric. Soil-stained, grayish, brittle with decay. They stopped. They didn't touch it. They took photographs, documented the location, marked GPS coordinates, and called it in. This time, the sheriff's office responded. Deputies arrived within the hour, followed by crime scene investigators. Yellow tape taped around the perimeter. The property, once abandoned, was now swarming with activity 3 years too late. The discovery made the news again, only this time, it wasn't a plea for help. It was a possible breakthrough. Authorities dug through the soil methodically, carefully. They unearthed more fabric, then a shoe, then bones. Human remains. They were sent to the state crime lab for identification. Kelsey waited. 10 days later, the results came back. The remains were not Echo's. The bones were animal, likely a large dog based on dental and bone structure. The fabric, a tattered tarp, possibly used to wrap the animal before burial. It was another dead end. Another cruel trick by fate. Kelsey cried. Didn't try to hide it. She had hoped. She had dared. And now she was right back where she started. But not quite. Because the world had seen what she had done. The media had documented it. The community had noticed. Her relentless pursuit, the digging, the scanning, the evidence gathering, had forced law enforcement to show up, had exposed their years of inaction, and had proved that someone cared. Echo's story refused to die. After the dig, a man approached Kelsey during a grocery store run in Warsaw. Middle-aged, gruff, with a raspy voice and sun-creased skin. He leaned in and whispered, "You're going to get yourself hurt asking about things that don't want to be found." Then he walked away. She reported it. Deputies took a statement, nothing more. Threats, warnings, vandalism, all designed to make her stop. But they only pushed her harder. She turned to a podcast with national reach, one focused on unsolved disappearances and corruption in small-town law enforcement. She told everything. The shed, the cadaver dogs, the man her mother feared, the strange silence that blanketed the town. The episode aired in October 2023 and exploded in downloads. Emails flooded in. Listeners from our country offered tips, connections, support. A retired forensic anthropologist from Texas offered to review any soil samples. A group of women from an advocacy group volunteered to help raise funds for a new private search. Even a documentary team reached out. They wanted to film Kelsey's fight for justice. Through it all, Kelsey remained focused. She wasn't interested in fame, only the truth. And then finally something changed. An anonymous letter arrived at her home in early January 2024. Typed. No return address, just a single paragraph. You need to search the old root cellar behind the Johnson barn. Ask about the night she went missing. Someone saw him leave around 11. He had help. No name. No fingerprints. No way to trace it. But it was specific. The Johnson barn, a half-collapsed structure about a mile from Echo's house, had long been abandoned. It sat on the edge of a private property line, right along a stretch of wooded land that bordered the lake. Kelsey had driven past it hundreds of times, but she'd never looked behind it. She contacted the property owner, an elderly man whose family had owned the land for decades. After some convincing, he granted permission to search the cellar. He admitted he hadn't been down there in years, said it wasn't safe, said there were snakes. Kelsey didn't flinch. She gathered a team again. Volunteers, 2 cameras, and a flashlight. They found the root cellar partially collapsed, covered in debris and leaves. The door hung off its hinges. Inside it was dark, damp, and rotting. But beneath the damp stone floor, something metallic glinted. An old toolbox, padlocked. They opened it. Inside were a collection of oddities, a burner phone, half destroyed, a pair of women's sunglasses, a plastic case containing what appeared to be folded receipts and handwritten notes, and at the bottom, a pink lighter, the exact kind Echo always used. Kelsey trembled as she picked it up. The sheriff's office was contacted again. This time they took it seriously. The items were taken into evidence. Forensic analysis was ordered. The sunglasses were tested for DNA. The receipts dated back to early 2020, all from nearby stores. The phone, though damaged, still contained fragments of data. And that data, buried in old message logs, revealed something explosive. A message sent from the burner phone on May 9th, 2020. I told her not to go to the cops. She said she would anyway. Said her daughter knows everything. He won't say a word after tonight. The message was unsigned. The recipient unknown. But the implication was undeniable. Someone had silenced Echo Lloyd. Someone who knew she was ready to talk. And someone who believed they had made sure she never would. The sheriff's office, now under scrutiny, had no choice but to reclassify Echo's case from missing person to suspicious death. No arrests were made. No suspects were named. But for Kelsey, it was validation. Her mother had not run away. She had not vanished into the woods. She had been taken. The details remained elusive. The person responsible still free. But the case was no longer buried. It was out. Echo's name now lived in the public record, not as a ghost, but as a woman failed by the system, remembered by her daughter, and fought for every step of the way. In the months that followed, a small memorial was erected near the edge of Echo's property. Just a bench, a plaque, her name, the dates, and beneath it, a quote chosen by Kelsey. You may bury the truth for a time, but it will not stay hidden. The story isn't over. Not yet. But for the first time, it's no longer silent. And that changes everything. Spring 2024 had barely begun when the media returned to Echo Lloyd's case again, not because of new forensic results, but because of something far more human, public pressure. A groundswell of interest had begun to grow from communities far beyond Missouri. Her story had appeared on multiple true crime YouTube channels, subreddits, and podcasts. The mystery had taken hold of strangers, and those strangers refused to let go. They wanted answers, and the world was now watching. With the newly uncovered burner phone evidence, there was an expectation, even a quiet assumption, that someone would be arrested. Someone would be brought in for questioning, or at least publicly named. But weeks passed, then months, and once again there was silence. Kelsey was used to that silence. But this time, it burned even more. She had done everything the right way. She had pushed with facts, not emotions. She had uncovered physical evidence. She had submitted it. She had waited. But Missouri's justice system remained as secretive as ever. A reporter finally asked the sheriff at a town hall in May why no arrests had been made, despite the mounting circumstantial evidence. The sheriff, clearly uncomfortable, gave a brief answer. Investigations take time. We are being thorough. But everyone in the room, and certainly everyone who had followed the case, knew what that really meant. There was no plan to act unless a body was found. That unspoken truth loomed over everything. And so Kelsey returned to the beginning again. Back to her own maps. Her own theories. One thing had never made sense. The timing. Echo disappeared on May 10th, Mother's Day. But the phone pings suggested she left the property around 6 p.m., or at least her phone did. The final ping near the bridge suggested a deliberate effort to make that device vanish. But there was a gap. Between 6 p.m. and the phone's shutdown later that night, there was almost no activity. That gap had always bothered Kelsey. She revisited the possibility that her mother had been moved from one location to another before the phone was dumped, perhaps placed somewhere temporarily, a holding location. A chilling theory emerged. There were several abandoned trailers and empty hunting shacks between Echo's home and the site of the final phone ping. Kelsey had never been able to access all of them. Some were private property, others overgrown and inaccessible. Now, with the help of new volunteers, she created a database, a comprehensive list of every empty structure within a 10-mile radius. They began checking them one by one. Most were exactly what they appeared to be: forgotten, collapsing, empty. But one, about 4 miles northeast of Echo's property, was different. It was locked from the outside. The windows had been blacked out with paint. And more importantly, it wasn't there in satellite images taken before 2020. Someone had moved it there. It was a small, prefabricated shed, the kind sold at hardware stores and delivered to remote lots. It sat behind a thicket of trees with tire tracks leading into the brush. It was barely visible from the road. When they broke the lock and entered, the inside made everyone stop breathing. There were no bodies, no blood. But the place was sinister. The windows had been sealed with foam and nailed boards. The floor was covered in old plastic. A single light bulb dangled from the ceiling, powered by a car battery in the corner. There was a chair in the center, old but intact, and duct tape on the floor around it, curled and hardened with age. On a shelf in the corner were small objects: an empty pill bottle, a used lipstick tube, and a keychain with the letter E. Kelsey's knees buckled. She had given Echo that keychain in 2017 for her birthday. She knew it without a doubt. This had been a holding spot. She called the sheriff's office again. This time, investigators responded. Forensic teams arrived, photographs were taken, items collected. The shed was processed for DNA, and law enforcement issued a new statement to the press. We are reclassifying this case as an active criminal investigation. The shed is being treated as a potential secondary scene. It was the first official acknowledgement that foul play had occurred. But behind closed doors, Kelsey learned more. A local property owner had seen that same shed being delivered in May 2020. The person who ordered it? Echo's neighbor. The man she had feared. The man who had been her last phone call. But he wasn't arrested. He denied everything. Said he had ordered it for hunting gear. That he'd never used it. That the keychain must have belonged to someone else. And once again, the sheriff's office said there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. Kelsey was livid, but this time she had backup. National advocacy organizations, including the Black and Missing Foundation, and private investigations for the missing had joined her fight. They pressured the Missouri Attorney General's office to intervene. They petitioned for oversight, and they succeeded. By July 2024, the case had been passed to the Missouri State Highway Patrol's Division of Drug and Crime Control, removing it from the hands of the local sheriff. Kelsey cried when she heard the news. It felt like a victory. Not the one she needed, not yet, but it was a step. New investigators began conducting fresh interviews, reviewing the case file from scratch, reprocessing physical evidence, and searching again for Echo's remains. Cadaver dogs returned to the property. New ground-penetrating radar was deployed, and then a new discovery. In September 2024, remains were found in a shallow ravine about 6 miles east of Echo's property. Clothing matched what Echo was last seen wearing. A set of partial dental records confirmed it. After 1,598 days, she had finally been found. Kelsey received the call at 9:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. She collapsed to the floor, hands shaking, eyes overflowing. It wasn't relief, it wasn't closure. It was the brutal end to a story she had prayed wouldn't end this way. But it was also the beginning of something else. Justice. The autopsy confirmed what Kelsey always feared. Blunt force trauma to the head. No accidental overdose. No wandering into the woods. No voluntary disappearance. Echo Lloyd had been murdered. Within 2 weeks, law enforcement arrested the neighbor. He was charged with second-degree murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. At the press conference, officials admitted they had failed Echo. That the early days of the investigation had been mishandled. That they had not followed up on obvious signs of foul play. It was rare, almost unheard of. But they admitted it. Kelsey stood at the back of that press room, arms crossed, tears silently flowing. She hadn't just found her mother. She had broken a wall that had stood for years. She had proved that determination, even in the face of indifference, could change everything. The trial is scheduled for early 2025. The man charged has pled not guilty. But for Kelsey, there is no longer mystery, only justice, and the unwavering memory of a mother who deserved better. The bench still sits near the garden. The plaque still shines. But now there's a new message carved beneath her name. She didn't vanish. She was taken. And we never stopped looking. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share